Hey everyone, it's been about 2 months since I started working on Project Feel the Vibe. It's time to take a look at the last 2 weeks to see where we're at. If you're new here, I recently left my job to work full-time on Project Feel the Vibe. Project Feel the Vibe is a third-person action game I'm developing solo. Combat is driven by musical moods. You have chill, hype, and heavy. Each changes your abilities and your playstyle. I've broken the timeline into 8 2-week sprints, each focused on specific systems and features such as combat, UI, enemies, and polish. The goal isn't to finish the entire game, but to create a playable polished slice that demonstrates my skills in design, coding, and production. This will hopefully serve as a portfolio piece to help me break into the video game industry. I've just finished Sprint 4, so let's take a look at how I started these last 2 weeks. After closing Sprint 3, I had to reorganize the tasks I had planned for Sprint number 4. I think my planning needs work because for some reason, I had my goals out of order. The original Sprint goal was to build the hub environment, mission UI, and the first extermination mission. The main issue with this goal is that I hadn't created any enemies to exterminate. So to restructure things, I ended up switching the goal to introduce the first magical monster and bring the extermination mission loop to life using existing player, combat, and HUD systems. Meaning we would be focusing on creating the basic functionality for the enemies so we can, well, exterminate them. This sprint should bring in the core loop so the player can accept missions, exterminate all enemies, then return to the hub, rinse and repeat. I gotta say, I'm not sure if my focus for this sprint goal was the best choice, but that's what I went with. After restructuring the sprint goal and tasks, it was time to review the previous sprint and write the script for the prior devlog. I did a little better at estimating how long it would take this time, but I still underestimated it by a bit. I enjoy creating the videos and documenting the process, so I think it's an okay trade-off. I think the more I do it, the better I'll get at it, and maybe I'll get faster at editing the videos. But in the overall scheme of things, I think it's better to focus entirely on the game. The amount of time that goes into writing the script, recording the script, and editing the video is valuable time that could be used to work on the project, and I'd be lying if I said the extra time wouldn't have helped me later on down the line. After the review, it was time to jump straight into the tasks. Now, as I work towards the goal of applying and getting hired at a AAA game studio, I'm doing my best to utilize the skills and tools I've learned in school while trying to envision what it would be like working at a studio. I know I'm working solo and it might be a little overkill, but I started trying to implement feature branches. I'm not sure if this is how it works in actual studios, but I create a branch from the main branch to a sprint branch, then from the sprint branch, I create feature branches. Once the feature branches are done, I build one-off versions to test the mechanics. Once they've all been tested and passed the quality checks, I merge them back into the sprint branch. Rinse and repeat until we reach the last feature, then merge back into the main branch. I believe this will be helpful for working on teams. That way, you can have a clear trail of what was being worked on and it's all isolated from the main branch, so if anything gets messed up, you're safe. I should mention that I'm using Unity's built-in version control system. Before I adopted this method, you can see I had one branch with a lot of changes, and I believe that's totally fine for solo projects as long as you keep your changes logged and save frequently. As I mentioned earlier, I'm doing this to apply what I've learned in school, imitate the industry, and just to be extra. The first feature I worked on was creating the base for the enemies with the intent of making the framework scalable and easily shared between multiple variants. For the most part, it started off strong with the base class and profiles that hold enemy data, including values such as health, armor, movement speed, base damage, and so on. However, later I realized I didn't use this properly. After setting up the base class, I worked on the next task, which involved creating the actual enemies I had planned for encounters. They're called Nightmareborn creatures, and as the name implies, they're monsters born from nightmares. So I set up the class, and the first mistake I made here was not keeping the enemy states decoupled. Initially, I created the states that existed within the Nightmareborn class, which was derived from the enemy base class we made earlier. While this works for one class, if I wanted to create a new enemy class, I would have to create the same states within a new class, essentially rewriting the same code. I would come to realize this later. On top of creating the enemy base class and Nightmareborn class, I had to update my health bar and respawn manager to accommodate the new changes. And we can't forget the fact that I created the ability for hit reactions and to have a hit flash occur whenever the enemy is hit. I wanted to test this and make sure it worked, only to find out that it worked in the editor, but not in the build. I wasted a bunch of time thinking the flash hitbox didn't work, then 5 hours later, I reverted all of the stupid and unnecessary changes I made, only to find out the previous changelog worked. You got stagger there. Oh, look at that! It's working! It's working! What the heck? I didn't do anything! Why is it working now? What do you mean? I've been here for hours! And then I say screw it. I say whatever. And now it's working. I don't get it. I don't get it. I'm not sure if this was a Unity thing or what, because even after opening the same build that worked, it just stopped working. Same build from yesterday, the hit flash, and no hit flash. So I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. So I just left that alone for the time being. I thought I would spend time trying to figure out modeling enemy monsters in Blender, but after that whole debacle, time was not on my side, so we have purple rectangles. Scary.
He's just standing there, menacingly!
Also, silly me forgot to create a feature branch for this task, so it ends up looking a bit messy. Really, the whole branch explorer looks kind of wonky as I figured out my workflow, but it'll get better over time, right? Surely. I then worked on the monster spawner and encounter system. This works by passing through a trigger, which then spawns the Nightmareborn monsters we created. I had issues creating a build to test the functionality, which seems to be a recurring thing, but after some brainstorming, I managed to track down the issue to test the new build. At this point, I was really exercising the idea of making small test builds to confirm features and giving them the label 0.4.0/development number _ task name. With the encounter volume set up, it was time to focus on creating the extermination mission. My plan was to create a small area and place the triggers at the entrance of each zone to test both the encounter volume script and the mission system. I shouldn't have taken as much time as I did for this. I could have just made a small room that has a couple of triggers and that would have the same result, but I took the time to line up walls and create 3 different zones with waves that spawn more enemies in each area. That aside, the area was created and now it was time to work on the extermination mission so it counts enemies, shows the count through a UI, and increases when they die. This first iteration worked fine, however, it didn't work the way I wanted. My consultant, Chad, and I weren't on the same page. I wasn't clear enough about how I wanted my extermination mission to work, which caused an issue where it wouldn't account for manually placed enemies in the scene and wouldn't account for multiple encounter volumes towards the overall enemy count in the mission. Also, somewhere along the line, I ended up messing up the UI that I had initially made, so I decided to revert everything. So it was back to square one. From now on, I have to make sure I have my systems mapped out and convey the exact function I'm expecting before starting my tasks. I find that reverting the changes and starting over helps in the long run because I've had too many issues trying to fix things to work the way I want rather than just having it work from the ground up. Working on this task kinda sucked and it felt like I was hitting my head against the wall, but I did manage to get it to work how I wanted after a lot of issues with things like the counter not going up when killing the enemies and small headaches like that. But I was done. During this time, I also decided to fix a game-breaking bug before shipping the test build. We all know what a bug is in video games, but a game-breaking bug is if it completely halts the progress of the game. What was happening was when the player would switch stances mid-attack, they would get stuck in the attack state, not allowing the player to attack again or jump. Next, I worked on the mission board and the mission briefing UI. This is around the time where I actually realized I need to be more descriptive with how I expect things to work. I'll let my time tracking speak for itself. Boy oh boy, did this unravel into a whole ordeal. This task ended up being messy because of bad planning and implementation. I think I relied too heavily on ChatGPT, which ended up with versions of things I didn't want, and in trying to fix it, caused even more issues. I honestly hate this system, and it's probably gonna bite me later, but it currently allows us to open the mission board, read the mission, press a button to go to the mission, or press a button to close out of the menu. Yeah, that task is complete. I was getting beaten up a lot during this sprint with these tasks, and it felt like I was getting drained, but surprisingly, this next task wasn't too much of an issue. With the extermination mission, encounter volume, and mission board successfully implemented, it was time to complete the loop and make a quick victory panel UI that displays when all enemies are defeated, which takes you back to the hub area. Given the amount of time I was spending on these tasks, I had no time to really plan out how I wanted the UI to look, so I have no design for this. I wasn't able to use Figma to plan it out, so everything is very bare bones. However, the panel will display features such as a grade or style counter, and the amount of time it took to complete the mission, among other things. Not sure how the grade system would work, but it's just an idea. Then it was back to the gut punches. The next task was to design the secondary enemies for the game. Where there are nightmares, there are also chances for sweet dreams. These enemies are known as Dreamborn creatures. The idea is that they will be non-hostile monsters that follow the player around and react to their mood. In chill, they'll vibe with Milo and provide a small health regen. In hype, they'll jump around and offer some other kind of buff, and etc. I don't really have all of these features fleshed out yet. This is where I realized how I went about my Nightmareborn monster was inefficient. I had created a new class for my Dreamborn monsters, and I noticed that I was redoing the idle and follow states. So I ended up creating proper state machine behavior by decoupling the states into different scripts and having one factory to house the transitions. But of course, it wasn't as easy as just making the new system. I had to convert the Nightmareborn monsters to the new system and basically just delete a bunch of scripts that did the same thing, on top of fixing other scripts that had to be refactored for the AI changes. It's not like it was the last day of the sprint or anything. One final kick to the groin. I was cooked on my tasks. I ended up putting a lot more time into tasks that I thought would only take a few hours and restarted 2 of those tasks, so there were some tasks that didn't get finished and it was indeed the last day of the sprint. So I was left with the decision of, should I wrap up the sprint and test the features to get ready for the next one, or should I tackle one more task so I can check off the list of acceptance criteria? I chose to try and finish one more task to end the sprint with a neat little bow. The task was for visual debugging. I wanted to maintain consistency in my visual debugging with the changes made to this sprint, which includes displaying the enemy's current state, attack patterns, and mission objectives on screen for testing and debugging purposes. For whatever reason, when I got to the point of incorporating enemies into the debugger, it wasn't updating the state properly, and I was sitting on this task for way too long, so I had 2 tasks that didn't get done this sprint, but they were mainly just visual things. I'm focusing on functionality first, so it was fine that these tasks didn't get done. Overall, Sprint 4 was a success. To test the end of my sprints, I use what's called a user story. User stories are statements that reflect what a consumer is expecting from a product or service. They're formatted like, as a person, I want to do something so that I can achieve some task. My user story for this sprint went something like, as a player, I want to select and complete missions from a hub so I can progress the story. Task complete. Okay, so now it's time to reflect on what went right and what went wrong for the sprint. Keeping the momentum going, I've been working on the project consistently. I'm picking up a consistent rhythm with coding and becoming more comfortable with command shortcuts in Visual Studio. I'm learning from mistakes and improving how I communicate with ChatGPT. I adopted a new workflow for my version control by implementing feature branches. I created a workflow for different versions of my builds. And I managed to accomplish the sprint goal. Now, as for what went wrong, this sprint felt very draining. I had multiple tasks I ended up restarting over and over until I got the results I wanted. I believe this is due to my poor planning and not having a solid foundation from the start. I didn't get to try to work on different models and visual effects like I thought I would because the time I put into the functionality took up too much time. And I kept underestimating just how long tasks would actually take, causing me to extend the sprint past the completion date and start the next sprint late. Now, what I need to do moving forward is, I need to make sure I'm taking a step back and understanding what my systems are and what the outcome should be. I need to make sure certain tasks are not scheduled to be worked on in future sprints, example, the blackout for the first extermination mission. And I need to maintain consistency with my version control workflow and create new branches whenever I work on new features. That's it for this sprint review. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you for watching, and I'd like to celebrate another milestone, 150 subscribers. That's 50 more from the last video. Will we reach 200 by the next video? Subscribe to find out. Until next time, we don't just dress to impress, we dress our games to stun. See you in the next devlog.